Everyone thought she was the victim, but she was the one pulling the strings. He didn't ruin her life. She rewrote his. Subscribe. The truth was never what it seemed. Sarah Miller had once been the kind of woman people trusted with their children, their secrets, their broken hearts. At 45, she had taught American literature at the local college for over a decade. She brought casseroles to grieving neighbours, tutored struggling teens after hours, and sent thank you notes with perfect handwriting. People described her with words like gracious, gentle, and impossibly kind. Her life, though quiet, seemed full. She lived in a modest white house with a wraparound porch and a well-kept garden. There was a dog, an aging golden retriever named Oliver, who followed her everywhere. Her husband, Mark, was a tenured professor of philosophy, charming, respected, a fixture in academic circles. Together they seemed almost too perfect, the kind of couple people cited as an example of lasting love. Then came the shift. Whispers began after Sarah abruptly left work one afternoon. She didn't return. Her absence stretched into days, then weeks. Officially she was on leave, but no one knew why. Rumours swirled: burnout, menopause, a family emergency. Then someone said she'd found something. A text message, a photo, a name, a student. By the time she returned, thinner and pale, her resignation had already been processed. She gave no explanation, just a soft thank you to the dean, and walked away from the life she'd built. A month later, they found her in her car at the edge of a public park. The engine was off. 2 empty wine bottles lay on the passenger seat. There was a handwritten note on the dashboard, folded neatly into thirds. No one revealed what it said. She had been unconscious but alive, rescued by a passing jogger who noticed the dog Oliver sitting calmly beside the car, leash trailing, waiting. The town responded like a body reacting to a wound. Mothers organised meal trains. Strangers left flowers on her porch. The church collected money in case she needed anything. The local paper ran an opinion piece titled "When Good Women Break," describing her as the latest casualty of betrayal. Her husband became the villain overnight. Faculty whispered. Parents frowned at him at PTA meetings. Someone scratched a word into his car. The young woman he was allegedly involved with withdrew from school. She was never seen again. Mark insisted there had never been an affair, that he had never touched the girl, never written those messages, never posed for that photo, but the image had been shared too many times, forwarded late at night in quiet acts of solitude. In it, a man who looked very much like him leaned in close to a much younger woman, his face shadowed, her lips parted. That was enough. His professional life unravelled. He resigned before the college could complete an internal review. He moved into a small apartment outside town. No one visited. Meanwhile, Sarah said little. She attended church, she adopted a routine, morning walks with Oliver, tea on the porch, visits to the library. She smiled at children, waved to neighbours. She looked fragile, but steady. A woman learning how to keep living. No one questioned her story. No one asked what had really happened, because everyone already believed they knew. It began with pity. Everyone in town pitied Sarah Miller. They pitied the way she walked now, slightly slower, as if her body bore invisible weight. They pitied the look in her eyes, soft and distant, like she was listening to a conversation no one else could hear. They pitied her porch light, which stayed on long after midnight, and the silent figure seen behind sheer curtains, standing still for minutes at a time, not doing anything at all. Ruth Danvers, who lived 2 doors down and had known Sarah since the neighbourhood was still building itself, pitied her too at first. She brought a casserole the week Sarah came back from the hospital, left it on the front steps when no one answered the door, and included a card that said, "You are not alone." She meant it. But Ruth was not sentimental by nature. She had a practical, careful mind, the kind that couldn't leave questions unanswered for long. And soon, questions began to pile up. Sarah told everyone she wasn't ready to go out. She said she found it hard to be around people. But Ruth noticed the flowers. The garden had always been Sarah's pride. But the blooms now were unnaturally perfect, trimmed, rotated, watered with almost military precision. Even during the days when Sarah supposedly couldn't get out of bed, the petunias never drooped. The bird bath stayed clean. The tools weren't left out in the sun. Ruth began watching, not out of malice, but habit. She told herself she was worried that if Sarah needed help, someone had to notice. She kept her curtains slightly parted in the mornings. She paid attention. Then came the receipts. The wind was always tricky in their cul-de-sac. It tossed trash between driveways, especially on collection day. One morning, Ruth spotted a crumpled piece of paper near her bin and bent to pick it up. It was a carbon copy of a private taxi service receipt, printed on thin pink paper. She almost threw it away, but the date caught her eye. Midnight. 2 counties over, paid in full, in cash. The name on the top said Miller. She told herself it could have been anyone. But the next week, another slip of paper turned up wedged in the fence. Same car service, same time, different location. Sarah never drove. Her car sat in the same spot every day, a thin layer of dust on the windshield. She hadn't renewed her registration. And yet, someone was going somewhere. Ruth started keeping a small notebook, not out of spite, but out of unease. There was no pattern to the taxis, but they happened. Always late, always cash. And then there was the moment with the window. It was early April. The sun was just high enough to hit the second-story windows, and Ruth was pulling weeds in her front yard. She paused to stretch her back and glanced up. The curtain in Sarah's bedroom had shifted open just a little, caught on the corner of a cracked frame. There on the windowsill lay a folded piece of stationery. Not one of those generic notepads Sarah kept in the kitchen, but thick paper, cream-coloured like something from a hotel. It was placed with intention, centred, clean, exposed to the light, like it needed to be seen. And the handwriting, though only one line was visible, was clearly not Sarah's. It was sharp, slanted, decisive. A man's hand, Ruth thought immediately, and not the clumsy scrawl of an elderly uncle, but confident. Intimate, fresh, the letter stayed untouched for days. No curtain closed, no hand reached for it. On the 3rd day, it was gone, the curtain drawn, the sill bare, no trace left behind. Ruth never mentioned it, not to her husband, not to the other women at church. It sounded like nothing. A slip of paper, some taxi receipts, a too-perfect garden. But together they unsettled her, because they didn't fit. They didn't fit the picture of a broken woman slowly recovering from betrayal. They didn't fit the fragile Sarah everyone brought tea and flowers to. They didn't fit the story the town so desperately wanted to believe. The one where the bad man did the bad thing and the good woman paid the price. Ruth began to understand something she couldn't yet name. She didn't think Sarah was lying, but she was beginning to suspect that Sarah was performing. And somewhere behind the quiet porch, behind the drawn curtains and the wide, sad eyes, Sarah's voice reached the town on a rainy Thursday morning, carried through crackling radio waves and quiet kitchens. It was the first time she had spoken publicly since the incident. The station's host introduced her gently, offering context and sympathy, and then let the air grow still as Sarah began to speak. Her voice was soft, measured. There was hesitation in the way she paused between sentences, a fragility that made listeners lean in. She spoke of betrayal, of loneliness, of the moment her life shifted without warning. She didn't name names, didn't accuse, but the outlines were unmistakable. Her story was now everyone's story. A faithful wife, discarded, humiliated, left to drown in silence. By the end of the segment, her voice cracked, not dramatically, just enough to feel human. She murmured a thank you, and then the host returned, voice thick with emotion, promising to follow up in support of women who had suffered in silence too long. The town responded with ferocity. Within hours, the recording of the broadcast had been shared across social media. It reached inboxes, message boards, church newsletters. The college received hundreds of messages demanding accountability. Faculty members, some of whom had never met Sarah, signed a petition calling for ethical review. The word predator appeared on a campus bathroom wall, scratched in hurried strokes above the sink. A week later, Mark Miller was called into a private meeting with the dean. The discussion was brief. His contract was terminated, effective immediately. The press release cited unresolved concerns regarding faculty conduct and made no mention of Sarah. It didn't have to. The young woman at the centre of the rumours, once a star student, always smiling, disappeared from campus the following day. Her scholarship was revoked quietly, without explanation. She never returned to collect her belongings from the dorm. No one knew where she had gone, but soon rumours surfaced again, this time about a letter. 3 letters, actually. Each sent anonymously. One to her parents, one to her high school principal, one to the admissions office of the graduate program she had been accepted to. The content varied, but the message was the same. She was immoral, manipulative, dangerous. Attached were screenshots. Nothing explicit, just suggestive, enough to cast doubt, enough to destroy. Sarah remained silent in the aftermath. She didn't comment publicly, didn't repeat the interview. When asked for follow-up, the station reported that she had declined with grace, wishing only for peace. She returned to her routines, morning walks tending the garden, quiet errands at the bookstore. But now, people greeted her with reverence. Shopkeepers gave her discounts without asking. Strangers offered hugs. At church, her pew was never empty. She had become a symbol, a woman wronged, surviving with dignity, a cautionary tale, a saint, and she wore that role with perfect poise like a second skin. Martha Reeves hadn't planned on coming back. The town was too small, too slow, too saturated with memories she had long since folded away. But when her mother passed, leaving the house and a garden full of overgrown roses behind, duty brought her home. And with it came the quiet gravity of unfinished stories. 15 years had passed since she'd last seen Sarah Miller. Once inseparable, they had drifted apart like many friendships do, without a fight, just distance. Sarah had stayed, Martha had gone. But now, with her return, the past seemed to tug insistently at the edges of the present. They met on a Sunday afternoon, by accident or fate. Sarah looked older, but in the elegant, untouched way of women who knew how to hide tiredness. Her hair was lighter, cut shorter. Her voice, when she greeted Martha, was warm but distant, like someone trying on familiarity for size. They sat in the kitchen of the White House with the wraparound porch. It was clean, curated, almost too quiet. Martha noticed the lack of personal clutter. No mail on the counter, no open books, no signs of daily mess. It was a home arranged for visitors, not for living. The conversation meandered through old memories, softened by time. Sarah poured tea, asked about Martha's job, her travels. Nothing deep, nothing dangerous. But when Sarah stepped out to check on Oliver in the garden, something shifted. Martha had gone to hang her coat in the hallway closet and opened the wrong door by mistake. Inside the bedroom, she caught a glimpse of the wardrobe. The doors were ajar. On one side hung muted dresses, blouses in soft fabrics, and a familiar cardigan Sarah had once worn in college. But on the other, half hidden beneath a black coat, was a men's shirt. Crisp, expensive-looking, not her ex-husband's size. Broader shoulders, longer sleeves, someone else's. Martha closed the door gently and tried to forget it. But when Sarah remained in the garden longer than expected, coaxing the dog or pretending to prune the already trimmed hedge, Martha felt the weight of something unsaid. In the bedroom, she sat on the edge of the bed and immediately felt a shift beneath her. Something was tucked under the mattress, just barely. She lifted it with hesitation and found a phone, not the kind Sarah had shown her earlier. This one was older, scratched, scuffed along the edges, but still powered on. The lock screen showed no notifications, only a simple numeric keypad and the time. She hesitated, then tried a code, then another. Nothing worked, but something else caught her eye. The corner of the screen revealed a small icon, a cloud sync in progress. The phone was connected to something, receiving or uploading. Curious and uneasy, Martha placed it back exactly as she had found it and stood, unsure whether to leave. When Sarah returned, smiling faintly, Martha excused herself to the bathroom. On the way, she noticed the door to the study cracked open. Inside, on the desk, lay a photo frame, face down. She turned it over. It was Sarah, and a man she didn't recognize. He was tall, tanned, clean-shaven, wearing the same shirt she had seen in the closet. They stood close, closer than friends. His hand rested on a lower back. Her face leaned toward his shoulder, relaxed and glowing in a way that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with possession. The photo was dated. Digital timestamp at the corner, 3 years before the divorce. Long before the town knew anything about betrayal. Long before the interview, the tears, the radio broadcast. Martha felt her pulse shift. The story she had been told, the one everyone had believed, now had cracks. Thin at first, but spreading. Sarah hadn't been the first to be betrayed. She had been the first to betray, and she had done it so quietly, so elegantly, that no one had noticed when the truth changed places with the lie. The house Mark Miller now occupied bore no resemblance to the one he had once shared with Sarah. It was smaller, darker, and smelled faintly of mildew and old takeout. The curtains were drawn even during the day, and the floor creaked with the kind of fatigue that came not from age but from neglect. He answered the door with red-rimmed eyes and a loosened belt, the kind of man who no longer cared if his shirt was buttoned correctly or if he had worn it yesterday. Martha had never been close to Mark. In truth, she had distrusted him, like most of the town had learned to, but something had changed in her since returning. The story no longer felt complete, and when she saw the hollowed figure of a man who had once been polished, confident and steady, she felt something she hadn't expected: uncertainty. Mark didn't protest her arrival. He waved her in with a weary hand and slumped into a chair without explanation. The table beside him was littered with bottles, some empty, some nearly there. Old newspapers were piled in the corner. On the wall, a crooked diploma hung above a half-assembled bookshelf, as if someone had tried to reclaim a past that wouldn't fit anymore. He said nothing at first, just sat, staring at the floor, fingers tapping a slow rhythm on his knee. Then he reached under a stack of unpaid bills and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. Its cover was worn at the edges, the spine nearly split. He held it for a moment, then slid it across the table. It had once belonged to Sarah. Martha recognized it instantly. She had seen it years ago when they were still young, before marriages and betrayals, when Sarah used to write in it during lectures, poetry, quotes from novels, lines about life and longing. But this was not poetry. The pages had been repurposed, carefully, ruthlessly. The handwriting was the same, elegant and restrained, but the content was something else entirely. Page after page was filled with structured plans, emotional analysis, tactical progression. The tone was cold, methodical. It was not a record of thoughts, it was a blueprint. Martha flipped through slowly, unable to look away. There were flowcharts that resembled psychological warfare, notes on cause and effect, lines drawn between words like humiliation, pity, and social collapse. Bullet points broke down behavioral patterns, predicted outcomes. One section was titled Crisis Construction, another read Emotional Optics Building the Narrative. Near the center of the notebook was a section written in bold ink, boxed in with a red pen. Step A, generate sympathy through visible collapse. Step B, undermine opponent's credibility using passive exposure. Step C, remove sources of defense by isolating from allies. Step D, solidify narrative through third-party validation. Each step had notes beneath it, timelines, potential risks, fallback options. At the bottom of the page, almost as an afterthought, was a single line in small slanted handwriting. It didn't look like part of the plan. It looked like a confession. Blaming him is easier than forgiving myself. But I forgive no one. Martha sat back, notebook still open in her hands, and realized that the truth had never been buried. It had been written clearly in ink long before anyone thought to look. Sarah hadn't unraveled, she hadn't broken, hadn't lost control. She had engineered it. Piece by piece, silence by silence, she had built her fall to look like ruin. But it had never been collapse, it had been architecture. Calculated, controlled, complete. The restaurant was warm with candlelight, its windows fogged slightly from the mixture of spring rain and the heat of clinking glasses, shared appetizers, low conversation. It was the kind of place where people celebrated anniversaries, quiet birthdays, and new beginnings. The kind of place that projected comfort and intimacy, carefully designed to make even strangers feel like something mattered. Sarah sat at a corner table, partially hidden behind a frosted glass divider etched with ivy patterns. She wore a soft ivory dress that fell gracefully across her shoulders, the fabric catching light with every shift of her posture. Her hair was pinned in a loose chignon, elegant but effortless, and her lips curved in a smile that had the weight of someone who knew exactly how to perform ease. The man seated across from her was older, distinguished, someone who had learned how to laugh without raising his voice. He reached for her hand occasionally. She let him. Her gaze drifted from him now and then, not with disinterest, but with quiet calculation, as though measuring the moment. A young waitress approached, barely in her 20s, nervous around the edges, but trying to mask it with practiced grace. She set down glasses, adjusted a plate, and turned to Sarah with a professional smile. Sarah looked up and held her gaze for half a second longer than necessary. Her smile was gentle, understanding, almost maternal. The kind that made people feel seen, even if they didn't understand why. The girl smiled back reflexively, a little surprised, then turned away, cheeks flushed with something she couldn't name. The waitress had no idea who the woman in the corner was. She didn't know the stories, the interviews, the collapse and resurrection. To her, Sarah was just a beautiful woman having dinner with a man who adored her. Across the parking lot, someone else was watching. Someone who knew everything. Martha sat in her car, engine off, windows just slightly cracked. Rain traced slow lines down the windshield. The inside smelled faintly of coffee and dust. On her lap sat an old laptop, its case scuffed, its hinges slightly loose. She opened it with deliberate care, her fingers trembling just slightly, and clicked on a file labelled only with a date. The video loaded in silence. It showed a hotel room, neat, impersonal, soft gold lighting. Sarah stood by the window, the same dress she wore tonight, cascading around her like silk armour. She was angled toward the glass, but the reflection in the window caught her full face. Calm, composed, alive with a kind of power that had nothing to do with cruelty and everything to do with clarity. In the corner of the reflection stood a man. Not her ex-husband, not the man in the restaurant, someone else. His posture was tense, frozen. The camera, placed discreetly, unknown to him, caught it all. Sarah's voice was quiet but precise, each word shaped with intent. If you ever tell anyone, I'll make sure you pay. And you know what's worse? No one will care who you loved. I was a convenient victim. Now you're a convenient target. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She stated it like a truth already written. Then the video cut off. Martha stared at the screen, her reflection layered over Sarah's frozen frame. The car was silent, except for the soft tapping of rain and the faint sound of celebration drifting from the restaurant. Inside, a waiter poured wine, a toast was made. Sarah laughed, head tilted slightly back, eyes crinkling at the corners. To anyone watching, it was the sound of someone who had survived and learned to live again. But Martha knew better. She knew the precision with which that life had been reconstructed. She knew the bodies buried beneath the foundation, metaphorical maybe, but heavy all the same. She knew the charm, the elegance, the perfection of Sarah's performance. And she knew what no one else dared to suspect, that Sarah hadn't just survived. She had conquered, quietly, methodically, and the cost of her victory was scattered in the wreckage of lives left behind. The town would continue to admire her. The man at the table would fall deeper in love. The waitress would go home and wonder who that woman was. But Martha sat in the dark, laptop slowly closing on her knees, and understood the truth. Sarah had won, and someone else, maybe many, was already next.